Thomas Alva Edison was born on February 11, 1847, in Milan, Ohio. Edison was a curious boy who began experimenting at an early age. His hometown of Milan, Ohio, was a busy place. Canals were the highways of the early 19th century. The Huron Canal connected Milan to the Huron River, which flowed into Lake Erie, giving eventual access to the Atlantic Ocean, making Milan an important shipping port. But when the railroad reached that part of Ohio, it bypassed Milan, and the town's trade faded. So when Thomas was 7, the family moved to Port Huron, Michigan, hoping for a better future. Thomas, the youngest child in the family, was rather sickly and a great concern for his mother, who had already lost 2 children in infancy and a third before Thomas's first birthday. He had 3 older brothers and sisters, only one still living at home. Thomas didn't attend public school for very long. Instead, his mother, a former schoolteacher, taught him at home. She organized lessons and an extensive reading program for her son. He loved to read and was especially interested in science and in what was going on in the world outside of Port Huron. Young Edison at 12 got a job selling newspapers and candy on the train. Thomas continued to devour science books and the newspapers he sold on the train. He later claimed that he had decided to read through all the books in the library, but gave it up after reading about 10 books that were pretty dry reading. Around this time, Edison realized that his hearing was deteriorating. His deafness has been attributed to various things, but was probably caused by an ear infection that went untreated. In those days, without penicillin or other antibiotics for treatment, deafness was fairly common, even in young people. Edison said that his deafness was actually an asset. He said, "It allowed me to work with less distraction and to sleep deeply, undisturbed by outside sounds." As a teenager, Edison was very enterprising. In Port Huron, he opened 2 stands selling newspapers and magazines and hired other boys to run them. For about 6 months in 1862, he also published his own newspaper, the Weekly Herald, which he printed in the baggage car of the train with the help of a friendly conductor. It concerned itself largely with local news and railroad matters and attracted many subscribers along the Grand Trunks Michigan line. Some of the profits Edison received from his various businesses went into building a small laboratory in one of the baggage cars. Bottles, batteries, and test tubes filled the shelves in the little lab, which thrived until one of his experiments involving phosphorus started a fire in the train car. The conductor ejected Edison, his laboratory, and his printing press at the next station. But Edison kept his job on the railroad. Then his life took an unexpected turn. A telegraph operator's young son wandered out onto the tracks in front of a rolling freight car. Edison ran out onto the tracks and snatched the child to safety. As a reward, the child's grateful father offered to teach Thomas the intricate skills of railroad telegraphy. At 16, Edison had found a new career as a telegraph operator. The job demanded very fast thinking and sharp reflexes to turn codes into words. Not only were the wages excellent, but the position was also prestigious. It's time for interesting facts about Thomas Edison and his soulmate. The Morse code. Number 1. Edison's first child was a daughter, Marion, born in 1872. Edison affectionately called her Dot, a reference to Morse code. Her younger brother, Thomas Jr., was called Dash. Number 2. Thomas and Mina Miller would hold hands and talk with each other. That's why he even proposed to Mina using Morse code. Number 3. Edison also had Morse code tattooed on his left forearm. To this day, no one ever knew why there was a coded message on his forearm or if it was a message at all. Riding the rails, Edison learned about the new technology of telegraphy. Morse's telegraph, patented in 1840, was the 19th century's equivalent to the World Wide Web, and Edison wanted to learn all he could about navigating this information superhighway. Telegraphers in those days were the links that joined a country together. In many respects, the telegraph molded the world in which Edison matured. Major newspapers relied heavily on telegraph reports purchased from news services. The telephone had not yet been invented, and email was a long way off. For the next 4 years, Thomas went on the tramp, traveling around the South and Midwest as an itinerant telegrapher. Telegraphers translated messages into electric impulses and sent them over the ribbons of telegraph wires that stretched across the continent. Since telegraphers not only sent and received messages but had to keep the equipment running, Edison learned a lot about practical electricity. This curiosity spurred his first serious efforts at invention. In Boston in 1869, Edison earned his first patent for an electrical vote recorder designed for the Massachusetts state legislature. But he found that the politicians weren't interested in speeding up their voting process, so they didn't want to use his machine. Edison later said that this experience taught him never to invent something people didn't want. He refused to become discouraged or view anything as a failure. As he would say, every wrong attempt discarded is a step forward. In 1871, Edison set up a workshop and laboratory in Newark, New Jersey, just across the Hudson River from New York City. Newark was known at the time for its community of fine machinists, the kind of people Edison needed to build his telegraph equipment. In that same year, he married Mary Stilwell, who worked for his Newark business. In 1874, Edison had his first big financial success with his quadruplex telegraph system, which allows a total of 4 separate signals to be transmitted and received on a single wire at the same time. This was a way of sending more than one message in one direction over a single wire. In this case, 2 messages in opposite directions simultaneously. Telegraph companies were eager for such a scheme because it let them send more messages over fewer wires, increasing their profits while cutting their costs. The story goes something like this. Thomas Edison approached the Western Union Telegraph Company with several inventions of his relating to the telegraph, especially the quadruplex telegraph system he had just completed. When asked how much he wanted for the inventions, Edison thought of asking for about $2,000, but instead he turned the question around and replied, "Well, suppose you make me an offer." Edison was amazed when they offered him $40,000. This was a lot of money for those days, and it allowed him to fulfill his wish to become a full-time inventor. Edison signed a highly profitable contract with Western Union, took the money to the New Jersey countryside, and built a laboratory complex at Menlo Park, nicknamed the Invention Factory. Edison set up his new complex in rural Menlo Park, New Jersey in 1876. Menlo Park was a town on the main rail line between New York City and Philadelphia. He chose the location because the land was cheap, and there was easy access to the resources of the cities, but it didn't have the distractions of the big city. He had a large staff of specialists, ranging from machinists to physicists, who helped turn his ideas into realities. He created what he nicknamed the Invention Factory, a complex of a laboratory, machine shop, office, and a library. In short, he put everything he needed for inventing in one place. The Menlo Park gang produced an incredible variety of inventions and improvements to existing inventions. They include the following: the phonograph, an improved telephone transmitter, the electric pen, and the electric light bulb. Edison worked long hours in his laboratory, quite unaware of the time. He would say, "I owe my success to the fact that I never had a clock in my workroom." He would work for 16 hours at a stretch, gaining a reputation for not sleeping. Actually, he took cat naps whenever he needed them and wherever he was located, sometimes snoozing in the middle of the day stretched out on the ground under a bush, on his workbench or on his cot located in the back of his laboratory. The Menlo Park laboratory was equipped with 2,500 bottles of chemicals lining the wall and a pipe organ at the back, which was the focal point for after-hour singing and beer drinking. Many times, the various scientists and technicians would stay up all night inventing and working. About midnight, Edison himself would sit down at the pipe organ, and everyone would join in for a sing-along. Many years later, his employees would say that these were the happiest years of their lives. Fun fact: the predecessor to the tattoo machine was the electric pen invented by Thomas Alva Edison and patented under the title stencil pens in Newark in 1876. It was originally intended to be used as a duplicating device, but in 1891, Samuel O'Reilly discovered that Edison's machine could be modified and used to introduce ink into the skin, and later patented a tube and needle system to provide an ink reservoir. Edison's experiments with the telephone also got him thinking about ways to record telephone messages so they could be copied later. This idea was similar to the devices used with the telegraph to write down the dots and dashes of Morse code. But then Edison turned the problem in a new direction and started to think about recording sound as something separate. He sketched and tested and modified ways to capture sound on the surfaces of cylinders or discs. In 1877, one of these designs worked. He wrapped a thick sheet of tinfoil around a metal cylinder. Then, turning a crank that moved the cylinder along a screw and shouting into a cone attached to a thin diaphragm and needle, or stylus, Edison tested the new machine. When the sound waves of his speech vibrated the diaphragm, it moved the needle up and down, making dents in the tinfoil. cranking the cylinder back to its original position and putting the needle back into the grooves it had made. Edison and his workers listened in amazement to the first recording of a human voice. Edison reciting, "Mary had a little lamb." One of his first reactions to hearing the playback was to be worried. He often said, "I was always afraid of things that worked the first time." Originally, Edison didn't think of using the phonograph for entertainment. He expected that businesses would use it for dictating letters. He manufactured an entire line of Ediphones for office use. But the real future of the phonograph lay in bringing music into people's homes. Edison's company not only made phonographs, but also ran recording studios and produced cylinder recordings of some of the most famous talent of the day. He also tried putting miniature phonographs inside of dolls, but the talking doll was never a commercial success. Don't you find it ironic that a person with deafness brought music to everyone? Please, write down your opinion in the comment section below. Of course, Edison's most famous invention to come out of Menlo Park was the light bulb. Edison didn't invent electric lights. There were arc lights already, which were similar to today's street lights. They were very, very bright, so people didn't want them inside their houses. At home, people used gas lights, but their open flames were dangerous and they flickered a lot. Edison didn't just invent the light bulb, either. He put together what he knew about electricity with what he knew about gas lights and invented a whole system of electric lighting. This meant light bulbs, electricity generators, wires to get the electricity from the power station to the homes, fixtures for the light bulbs, and more. It was like a big jigsaw puzzle, and Edison made up the pieces as well as fitted them together. One tough piece was finding the right material for the filament. That little wire inside the light bulb. He filled more than 40,000 pages with notes before he finally had a bulb that withstood a 40-hour test in his laboratory. In 1879, after testing more than 1,600 materials for the right filament, including coconut fiber, fishing line, and even hairs from a friend's beard, Edison and his workers finally figured out what to use for the filament: carbonized bamboo. The first large-scale test of the system in the United States took place when Edison's Pearl Street station in New York City's financial district sent electricity to lights in 25 buildings on September 4, 1882. After the success of Menlo Park, Edison built a new laboratory complex in 1887, bigger and better equipped in every way, in West Orange, New Jersey. There, he worked on all sorts of projects, ranging from movies to cement. There were happy times and sad ones in his personal life. His first wife, Mary, died in 1884, and he remarried 2 years later to a young socialite named Mina Miller. From the two marriages, he had 6 children, one of whom became governor of New Jersey, another who followed his own career of the inventor. The first big invention to come out of Edison's new lab was motion pictures. In October 1888, he began working on a machine he called a kinetoscope, writing that he was experimenting upon an instrument which does for the eye what the phonograph does for the ear, which is the recording and reproduction of things in motion, and in such a form as to be both cheap, practical, and convenient. Working with a small research team that included photographer William Dixon and machinist Charles Brown, Edison developed a motion picture camera called a kinetograph and a machine for watching movies called a kinetoscope. The first movies were peep shows which only allowed one person at a time to watch. With the development of the projecting kinetoscope, audiences of several people could enjoy silent movies. Of course, no one was making movies at the time, so Edison also set up a studio on the laboratory grounds. Covered in black tar paper, it was nicknamed the Black Maria. It had a roof that opened to the sun to let in daylight and was set on a turntable, so the entire building could be rotated to follow the sun. In 1899, Edison began working on a storage battery for electric vehicles. He thought that electric cars were better than gasoline or steam-powered vehicles, but realized that the storage batteries in existence limited the practicality of electric cars. With typical optimism, he announced to the press in 1902 that his batteries would run for 100 miles or more without recharging, and he proclaimed, "I do not know how long it would take to wear out one of the batteries, for we have not yet been able to exhaust the possibilities of one of them." Despite those claims, the batteries still required a lot of work. And by that time, cars with gasoline engines were clearly the market leader. Edison's batteries, however, found many other uses in things like railroad signals, miners' headlamps, and marine buoys. The storage battery was his most profitable invention. In his leisure time, Edison became good friends with other famous people, like automobile maker Henry Ford, tire manufacturer Harvey Firestone, and director Sergio Leone. He began taking annual camping trips with them in 1916. Troubled by diabetes and stomach ailments for many years, Edison's health declined, and he died at West Orange, New Jersey on October 18, 1931. Crowds lined up for blocks to pass by his coffin in the lab's library. President Herbert Hoover requested a minute of silence and darkness to honor the great inventor, and at 10 p.m. on October 22, 1931, people around the United States turned off their electric lights. Thomas Alva Edison, the Wizard of Menlo Park, never stopped inventing. At the end of his life, he had 1,093 patents to his name. To this day, no one has topped his record. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe.